All right, welcome in everyone to the 8th episode of the Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM. I am Blake Wallace, your host, joined by my co-host and great friend, Jake Aaron.
Hello, hello.
Today's show, Jake and I look once again forward to the NFL draft, yet this week we focus on the Patriots and their number 3 pick. Can the Patriots turn their franchise around in just one draft? We have those answers for you. Next, we leap into UFC 299. Sugar Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Chito Vera 2. I love fireworks and I love rematches. Saturday night has both in spades. Finally, the Blake and Jake Show ends by talking about some record-breaking careers, the careers of LeBron James and Caitlyn Clark, and we're going to talk about even if their success is replicable in their respective leagues. To find the Blake and Jake Show, you can find us on Spotify and YouTube at the Blake and Jake Show, or you can catch up with us on Instagram. Catch up on all the new things that are going on. That is the Blake and Jake Show, but on that one, no spaces. Jake, go ahead and take it away with the weekly sports news update.
All right, thank you, Blake. The longest winning streak, softball winning streak in NCAA history ended just a few days ago on March 3rd when the University of Louisiana Lafayette's Ragin' Cajuns beat the Oklahoma Sooners 7-5 to snap a 71-game win streak. Prior to this streak, the Oklahoma Sooners' last loss was on February 19th, 2023, and this loss was even more impressive because they were at home. And before this loss, they hadn't lost at home in over 4 years.
Some time.
Yep. Moving on in NFL news, the Denver Broncos announced earlier this week that they'll release Russell Wilson when the season begins. The Broncos extended Wilson 18 months ago to a 5-year, $242 million extension. The Broncos still owe Wilson his $39 million salary for 2024, minus whatever he'd sign with for another team, which could very well be the veteran's minimum salary of $1.21 million. As a result of cutting Wilson, the Broncos will take a record $89 million hit in dead cap charges over the next 2 seasons. Blake, what do you think about the decision for the Broncos to cut Russell Wilson?
I think they were left without a choice. I haven't liked the way that the Broncos were running sometime, and I know they fell under new ownership, and that was, not with Sean Payton. Then, of course, they kind of do things a little bit backwards. I believe the hope for the Broncos, and maybe a little bit messy of a year than they would have liked, was to get Aaron Rodgers. Does not get Aaron Rodgers. Go to a backup plan. You get Russell Wilson, get fleeced in the deal. Simply put, I think now it's Sean Payton saying, let's clear the books and let's start with a clean sheet of paper with whatever I would like to build from and go from here, because that's what the ownership brought Sean Payton in to do. That's what Sean Payton demanded, I'm sure, in those negotiations going for the job. So I do think that this was just kind of a necessary evil, and the blame goes back to the ownership group for giving Russell Wilson such a long extension when really I think there was a lot of data showing that Russell Wilson had been deteriorating over the last few years, even in Seattle. So I do think it was ill-advised, obviously, in hindsight, to give Russell Wilson the contract. And with the way NFL money moves, it's best just to get the player off your books as quick as possible and to move on to the next thing. I think that the Broncos made the right move, but it was after a series of wrong moves. And we all know one of my favorite things is what starts screwed up ends very screwed up. So I think that's what was happening there. And I think Sean Payton said, you know what, we're going to cut that arm off and restart.
All right, well said. Moving on. Finally, Eagles center Jason Kelce announced his retirement on Monday, ending his 13-year Hall of Fame career. Kelce, who's 36, played his entire career with the Eagles and won a Super Bowl with them in 2018. He was selected to 7 Pro Bowls in 13 seasons, including a Pro Bowl this last season, which really proved how dominant he was all the way up to the end of his career. And since the 1970 merger, he's the only center who's won a Super Bowl and earned first-team All-Pro honors at least 6 times. Blake, what do you have to make about Jason Kelce's really his phenomenal career and ultimately his decision to retire?
Yeah, my eyes on this situation look forward, not behind. Jason Kelce was a spectacular football player, a very smart center for the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Eagles really never let him go, and that's just the mark of a great center. When you get great offensive linemen, you can know that by if one team keeps them for the entirety of their career, and that's such a special commitment, a team to a player, and actually being able to stay your career in one place. Now moving on. And we've already gotten to see through the podcast world what Travis and Jason Kelce can do, outside of football. And I'm just excited to see what more happens for Jason Kelce. I don't see Jason Kelce fading out into obscurity. I think we still see him around here and there. And to be honest, I think it's just a reason for excitement.
Yeah. What do you think? There's a chance of him going to the broadcast booth?
There's a chance for the broadcast booth. It is going to be interesting because I would love to see their podcast keep going because it's one of the more spectacular NFL player podcasts that there are out there. But, I mean, once again, in any capacity, and he's going to be paid quite a lot of money to either broadcast or just give his opinions on certain positions. I think anything that he does is going to be successful. He's just too much of a personality to fail, I think, outside of football.
Yeah, well, thanks. And all right, I believe that does it for the weekly sports update.
That was Jake with the weekly sports news update. All right, and now we move into topic one. What do the Patriots do with the third pick in the 2024 NFL draft? It seems like an easy option when you look at it. There's 3 tier 1 quarterbacks, but the more you dig into this draft, the more you dig into what people are saying about each one of these quarterbacks, more specifically Jaden Daniels or Drake May, which it seems likely will be available. One or the other will be available at the time that the Patriots are called to select their draft pick. It's interesting if that is the route they go, because simply put, let's talk about this right now. Let's go into option 1 for the Patriots and their number 3 draft pick. Caleb Williams goes 1. Then it's all about who the Commanders pick at 2 for the Patriots. That's what all eyes are on the Commanders. And when I look at the Commanders and I look at the coaching staff, specifically offensive side of the ball, Cliff Kingsbury, I ask myself, would you rather have Jaden Daniels or Drake May? And I keep coming back to the same answer, and it's not the answer I'm seeing everywhere online when you're looking at mock drafts from either CBS, Mel Kiper, or any of the billion people that do mock drafts. You're starting to see a lot of Drake May. You're starting to see a little bit more Jaden Daniels. I expect that trend to continue because Jaden Daniels has had the better, more recent success. I think will measure well in his college pro day. I think that'll be a big day for Jaden Daniels to up his stock there. I think that when we're drafting, when it's draft day, Jaden Daniels will be the number 2 quarterback on a lot of teams' boards, and Drake May maybe 3, 4, some teams 5. Now, why do I say this? There's been a lot more talk about processing power this year because last year the quarterback duos were Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud. C.J. Stroud scored the lowest score on a Wonderlic test ever, and that's supposed to tell somebody how you process things. Yet, obviously, that just needs to be changed. Yet, because Stroud was spectacular all year long, can so clearly read a defense and can handle the different things that an NFL team can throw at him. And Bryce Young similarly has struggled despite having a great Wonderlic score, and that being maybe to some of the teams the big differentiator of the two last year. This year, it feels like a lot of teams are maybe even prioritizing that processing power. I think the advantage in that processing power does go to Jaden Daniels over Drake May, which means Drake May be available to the Patriots at 3. And then it's all about what are the Patriots looking for right now? Do you draft Drake May if he falls to 3 and you're not sure he's the 3rd best quarterback? Because the alternative here is that Marvin Harrison Jr., who is likely the best player in the draft, barring position there, is still available and on the board. It's hard for me to believe that the Patriots are going to swallow this pick and say, I'll take Drake May if they're not sure, when there's just so much talent left in this draft, especially in the first 5, 6 positions of this draft. What are your thoughts, Jake, on the Jaden Daniels versus Drake May comparison? Do you feel like one has a bigger chance to be left at 3 than the other?
Yeah, I'm thinking that Jaden Daniels is gonna go at 2. The Patriots, if they don't end up giving away this pick, I think they're going to take Drake May. We've talked about him on the show before. May's a good deep ball thrower. He's a pretty good dual threat ability. Could potentially, run the ball. He's got a lot of potential, and I think if the Patriots do, if they do go with May, they won't be too disappointed with him.
I think that's a great point there because I tried to put myself in the fan shoes of a fan. And I struggled because one, Patriots fans are just so weird and mean and awful, but also just because you've had Tom Brady and it's a slippery slope running for these top pick quarterbacks that are second and third because simply put, one or two of these quarterbacks are going to work out. We have not gotten to a draft where 5 or 6 quarterbacks have gone and they're all capable starters in the NFL. That's just not the percentages that the NFL is working with at the moment. Are you going to take the third choice, the last of the tier 1 quarterbacks, and bank on Drake May being the number 1 talent? It's hard for me as a fan to believe that almost. And the Patriots are not used to bad quarterback play. They've gotten a little bit more used to it in recent years, but I do believe Tom Brady is still the standard there, and it's tough to bring Drake May in to a Tom Brady standard team. Go ahead, Jake.
Well, I think Tom Brady is always going to be the standard until if somebody ends up surpassing that. I think as fans, you gotta, I guess, lower your expectations a little bit. There's a good chance you're not going to get the next Tom Brady right away, right? So I think like I said, you gotta lower your expectations and just hope for the best, but don't expect the next Tom Brady.
And you're certainly right. And it's not as if Drake May doesn't look the part for a Patriots quarterback as well. He's big, strong, will be able to throw into the heavy winds that the Patriots in New England have to deal with. And a lot of their opponents as well who play in that tough weather. That does feel like the kind of game that Drake May is cut out for. The question is, at 3, is that a great pick? And I think we're kind of stuck on, yes, you take that if you're the Patriots because it might be, your best chance at a elite, young, cheap quarterback that you're going to have. Yet at the same time, I think it's a little bit more my opinion that you're just risking too much with Drake at 3, especially if he's not the first 2 on your specific board if you're a New England Patriot right now. That option 2, though, you alluded to it in just a little bit, but at that number 3 position, say you're not interested totally in Drake May. Say right now you're the general manager of the New England Patriots. You're 60% sure Drake May is a great pick at number 3. Now, up in the leading moments of the draft, you're starting to get some calls because some teams are nervous. Let's say Kirk Cousins decides to go back to the Vikings. Now you have the Falcons, the Broncos, the Raiders, and the Buccaneers possibly, if they cannot lock up something with Baker Mayfield, calling to see, hey, what is that third pick worth to you? And I guess my question, Jake, is exactly that. What is that third pick worth to the New England Patriots?
I think it's got to be worth a lot. The third pick, it's a very, very valuable pick. I feel like unless they're dead set on Jaden Daniels, if he's available, or Drake May, they got to at least entertain offers from other teams.
Yeah, and if we're discussing, first goes Caleb Williams, second goes Jaden Daniels, and a lot of teams are high on Drake May, including, the Broncos, the Raiders, Buccaneers, Falcons, possibly Vikings if they're not the ones who get Kirk Cousins. Then you start looking at, hey, is the number 3 the new number 1 pick in this draft? And that's a valuable spot for the Patriots. That's where you can trade back. You can trade and get a great player. And in the case of the Broncos, I think that the Broncos could sit there and be talked into Patrick Surtain and a first. Because they're a few years out from putting together a team that is capable of challenging a team like the Kansas City Chiefs in their own division or the rest of the AFC, which is right now stacked and loaded with all the best quarterbacks that the league has to offer. So you could package a first and Surtain. I think the same thing for the Raiders. The Buccaneers have all kinds of talent all over the field. Now, can you get a deal together that entices the Patriots? That's the biggest question. Do you offer 2 firsts? Is there a team that would offer 2 firsts if you're the Falcons and you say, we were in the running for Kirk Cousins. We didn't get Kirk Cousins, but we do feel like we're about a player or 2 away, and one of those players have to be a quarterback. And that's just what holds out to me. Are there any home run quarterbacks in free agency? Other than Kirk Cousins, I don't think that you could ask a GM who would mention another name in that A to B plus range quarterback that's out there on the market to be picked back up. And simply put, that might just make this number 3 pick all the more valuable to the Patriots. What are your thoughts on that, Jake?
No, I'd agree. I mean, like kind of like I said before, they have to be wowed in order to give up this number 3 pick, and I don't know if there's anything out there, any quarterback out there that is going to wow them. So I don't know. I mean, it's gonna be an interesting situation to see what happens close to when we get closer to the draft.
It certainly is. And when we're looking at these 3, 4 different 5 possible teams, it's all about, kind of getting the pressure cooker a little bit up. Hey, I don't want to enter a new year with the same quarterback that I had last year. I don't want to enter this year with a worse quarterback that I had last year. It's all about a few of these different teams and their evaluation on Drake May and how he will fit in their system. Because, you say maybe Drake May fits in New England, but does he look a little bit better in a Sean Payton system? Does Sean Payton value him more in his system than the Patriots would? Is it worth Patrick Surtain and possibly a first or a second? Do the Raiders see that as troublesome and go, hey, I'll give you 2 firsts right now. I'll give you first next year and the first this year, and you know what? You take it. I'll take Drake May, and we'll see if we can start the new era of Raider football. Falcons, like I said, the Falcons are really a team that are in that Kirk Cousins race because they feel like they can take an advantage and really put themselves in a new stratosphere next year. And that third option that we're going to get into today is one of my favorites because it looks now like the Buccaneers are beginning to prop themselves up to offer Baker Mayfield quite the deal. Likely around Daniel Jones. I'm hearing $35 to $40 million a year. That is no discount, which there were reports that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were hoping to get Baker Mayfield at a little bit of a discount. That's just not how the modern NFL works. If you give a quarterback a starting position and they play well, don't expect a discount then because you just gave that quarterback a platform to show his skills off. Now there's other teams, and testing free agency as a quarterback has to be a very exciting venture, especially if you're Kirk Cousins, who's getting fully guaranteed deals, and his last few has now posted himself up as, one of the most richest in quarterback contracts and NFL contracts than any other quarterback, despite not even being the best quarterback of his era. We're going to talk about what if the Patriots were able to offer Baker Mayfield some money, get him into a Patriots uniform, and then you could spend that third pick on Marvin Harrison Jr., the only real blue chip supreme pick here that is almost guaranteed to work. That way you have a quarterback that you feel comfortable in, a quarterback that has proven himself to play at the NFL level, and Marvin Harrison Jr., which will be the best wide receiver that you could get out of this draft, let alone just, I think, possibly in a few years, going to be the best wide receiver or one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. It just feels like a possible option for the Patriots to sneak ahead a little bit and to put themselves years ahead of their recovery plan from the Belichick era. This was talking about a rebuild that was going to take a few years. Next thing you know, you got Baker Mayfield, you got Marvin Harrison Jr., and nobody's talking about a rebuild anymore. They want to see what you can do in a division where we don't know what the Bills are going to look like. We don't know what the Jets are going to look like, and we certainly don't know what the Dolphins are going to look like. That's just it's an interesting division right now, and the Patriots have to feel like, while maybe they're not in a catbird seat to take the division, that they have some serious cards in their sleeves to play here.
Yeah, I think if they're able to go with this option, I think a lot of things are going to have to go right for them for this to be available. But if things do go right for them, then and they are able to get Baker Mayfield and then draft Marvin Harrison Jr., I think that's by far their best option.
Yeah, it's the best option. It's probably the best case scenario for the Patriots. And it would likely make every Cardinals fan hate them because the Cardinals at 4, they're probably crossing their fingers a little bit, but the Cardinals at 4 are probably feeling like Marvin Harrison Jr., the best player in this draft, might just fall to them if they're patient enough. The Patriots might be one of the only teams to shake that future up for them, and we're just going to have to sit tight and wait to see how that all plays out. But first, we're going on a quick break. On the other side, the Blake and Jake Show, we'll be going over UFC 299 O'Malley versus Vera 2. So excited for that. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. I am too excited for Saturday. It's UFC 299. Sean Sugar O'Malley versus Marlon Chito Vera 2. It's a rematch. It's fireworks. I'm absolutely ablaze. Cannot wait for it to get to UFC 299. And we're going to talk about it right now, but we're going to start at the very bottom of that pay-per-view list there. The very first matchup in the main card is Peter Yan versus Song Yadong. This is a bantamweight matchup, and I'm going to take MMA fans back to July 2020 because it was a much different time. You could think about all the different things in your personal life, all the things politically that were going on then versus now. You know, maybe just, kids, dogs, all grown up. Back then, Peter Yan was 15-1. And the bantamweight champ. It was much different of a life for Peter Yan. Yet now, fast forwarding to present day, and Peter Yan is 1-4 in his last 5 matchup, and is a far cry from getting back to that belt talk, that belt discussion there. It's tough because he's so terrifying as a Muay Thai specialist, and he presents dangers to every fighter. And I do think he is a challenging fight for any fighter in that division, from champion to 1 to 6 to 15, regardless of who he's fighting. Just a difficult guy to figure out, and so sharp and technical with all of his strikes. It's hard to see this fall and make sense of it. I'm going to go ahead and ask you, Jake. It's July 2020. It felt like Peter Yan was there to stay. Is Peter Yan still elite, or is he too old? What's happened?
I think you can consider him up there with the elite, but I don't know if you can consider him the best of the best. He has not won a fight since October 2022. I will say, at his best, he is a very good fighter. Like you said, he has razor sharp combinations, brutal, really just brutal power. But in terms of if he's, the best of the best, he might be up there, but you can't consider him at the top.
Yeah, like I was saying, 1-4 in his last 5. Now, that win was against Cody Sandhagen, and all of his fights were against the most elite fighters that division had to offer. And this doesn't change because he's going up against Song Yadong right now, 21-7-1, 26 years old, entering his prime. Coming off wins against Ricky Simone, who I think is just an extremely tough UFC fighter. That's a mean test. And Chris Gutierrez, but has faced elite challenges like Cody Sandhagen in 2022. He was turned away at the end of the 4th round due to a doctor stoppage. There are only so many chances to test yourself against the best that the UFC can offer, especially if your dream is a UFC title. I guess Song Yadong really has to win this fight, doesn't he, Jake?
Yeah, I think he does. But you know what? If there's one time for him to win, it could be this, because he's on a tear right now. He's won, I believe, 5 of his 6 last bouts. So I mean, this is the time to strike.
Yeah, I do agree. This is the time to strike. Both of these fighters will be striking. Neither of these guys are going to be too interested in taking to the ground. Peter Yan has fantastic trips. Really doesn't follow his opponents to the floor, though. It's really just it's almost, and this is what I love about the way that Peter Yan fights. There's a confidence that goes beyond the fighting. Like, if he can embarrass you in a fight, and it might not even cause physical pain to you, he will, because he's a bully in there. He is going to try to make you feel like you don't belong in there. And Song Yadong, being 26, having already been turned away in his first kind of title, let's call it a title eliminator, because Cody Sandhagen is always around that title picture. Yet, it feels like, how many times until you become a gatekeeper? And Song Yadong, of course, being 26, should still have a little bit of time, as you were pointing out. But I do agree. This is a striking battle. That is Song Yadong's specialty. And I think without any real threat that this could hit the floor in a major capacity, it feels like this is a fight that is set up for Song Yadong to make a name off of a guy that people still think is the toughest there you can find in the bantamweight division. And for Peter Yan, this is a strange matchup here because you've been relegated to the gatekeeper role. Yet how many more fights are the UFC going to give you if you can't put a win together here? So for Peter Yan, this might be last chance you for the UFC. And for Song Yadong, this might feel the same way for his title shots there. A lot riding on the line for that very first matchup. That brings us into a second matchup to a little bit older competitors here, especially in Gilbert Burns, 22-6, right now ranked 4th in the welterweight division versus Jack Della Maddalena, 16-2. He's definitely the high riser here, currently ranked 11th in that welterweight division. Real quickly, I'm just going to ask you that these two fights are interesting. These two fighters are interesting because this is one where Gilbert Burns is clearly a master on the ground, and Jack Della Maddalena is known for the boxing, is known for the striking. What are your immediate thoughts about how this fight will take place come Saturday?
So you mean like what? Well, okay, I'll just get into it. I think that Burns. I'm going with Burns. I don't know if he's gonna win by knockout. I think he's gonna win by decision. But he is who I have. He's who I have winning just because of. I mean, he's a world class Brazilian. He's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, right? And his takedowns, as you mentioned, his ability to fight on the floor is very, very impressive. Even though he's facing Jack, who has quick hands, good power, but the ground game just is. I feel like it's too much for him.
This is so clearly, and I'm glad you said that because this is so clearly a test by Dana White and the decision makers to really find out what Jack Della Maddalena, trying to see if there are any weaknesses in the game because he has been tested on the ground, but has he been tested by Gilbert Durinho Burns? Because that is, you get a gold star for just surviving a ground attack from Gilbert Burns. That's what I think this matchup is really all about to the UFC matchmakers. They just want to see, does Jack Della Maddalena really have it in some of the areas where he's thought to be weakest? Because if he's able to defend Gilbert Burns, if he's able to not even have to mix up on the floor, getting a scrap on the floor, then I think that shows you all you need to know about Jack Della Maddalena, 11th in the welterweight division, facing the 4th. This clearly means if Maddalena is able to win this fight, then he might already be in that title picture come Sunday, right after that matchup, because Gilbert Burns has just done so much in that division. It would be such a notable win so early on in his career, especially with a record like 16-2. Gilbert Durinho Burns, though, coming off a contender eliminator match versus Bilal Muhammad, didn't go his way. It kind of forces him into the role of gatekeeper. And this is quite the gate to be keeping because Jack, like you said, been tearing through the division, has got the hands to turn back any fighter. And we're going to talk about him a little bit later, but has wins over Kevin Holland and Hafez already, which those are two big fighters. Now, both of those were split decision wins, but it shows that Maddalena belongs in the cage with these guys. To me, this is one of the last tests before Maddalena is getting himself in a title match because, simply put, there's been no fighter that's been able to cause too much of an issue for him to solve this far. Jake, which fighter of the two is the most well-rounded fighter to you?
Well, although Burns is dominated or is able to dominate with his floor game, I would go with Maddalena. I feel like he's just a more well-rounded because he, Burns can focus on that ground game. He's good otherwise, but Maddalena I feel like is just more. He's more well-rounded because he doesn't have that one skill that can dominate. He can't dominate with the ground game or with a certain skill. So because that, I'm gonna go with him as the more well-rounded. What do you think?
I think it's closer than many would think. I'm shocked that you went on the sides of Maddalena, but I'm not super shocked because Gilbert Burns is one of the guys that I think of as kind of just a jack of all trades. I'm going to steal the first name of his competitor there. Is just a jack of all trades, really. Can get it all done. On the ground, he's fantastic, but I don't think he relies too much on the ground game to where his striking is at a deficit. But then again, that's exactly what the matchmakers put Jack Della Maddalena in this matchup to find out is who's the more well-rounded fighter? Because if it's Maddalena, with all Maddalena can do in the striking department, then that's a fighter you need fighting for a championship. But this next question, it does focus on Burns a little bit more. If Burns is able to win this matchup, does he escape this gatekeeper role that he's been relegated to?
I don't think so. I don't think so because, as you mentioned before, Maddalena is 11th in the division, and Burns is 4th. So I think that definitely has something to do with it. He's, if you want to go strictly by that, he's facing somebody that he quote should win, but or should beat. But I feel like if he were to get if he were to play somebody a little more closer, somebody who's not as on the come up, so to speak, then I feel like then he would be able to get out of that gatekeeper role. But I don't think so if he wins this matchup.
Yeah, and I think that was well said. It's hard for gatekeepers to get out of that position in just one fight unless it's a spectacular finish, something that really pushes fans and matchmakers to believe that your name should be in another title eliminator, especially after Burns has been really beat down in a few of those different places that the UFC matchmakers have put him. I have to think that, this isn't, unless it's a masterful finish, I do see that Burns stays in this gatekeeper role for a little bit, which is interesting because you think about a fighter not having a lot of time in their career, especially Burns, who's been around for a while, likely going to have to win those gatekeeper challenges and then come up and do something he's never done before in winning a title eliminator to ever get back to the possibility of being a mainstay in that welterweight division. All right, and we're moving on to another welterweight matchup here. And this one, the last matchup is one that I feel like UFC matchmakers, this is like a patented matchmaker move. We're going to get a guy who's better striking and a guy who's better on grappling. We're going to see which one's the more well-rounded fighter. This next matchup is just insane. It's bananas. It is meant clearly just for the fans and their enjoyment. I'm going to enjoy this fight. In fact, I've had it circled for quite some time. We've got Kevin, the Trailblazer Holland, 25-10, currently ranked 13th in the welterweight division. He's been all up and down that welterweight versus UFC newcomer, yet really MMA, longtime popular fighter, Michael Venom Page at 21-2. This is just a nutty fight. Kevin Holland, a fighter that draws a crowd regardless of the outcome. That's at least what the UFC thinks. He gets a chance to draw the most interesting fighter outside of the UFC for at least a time, Michael Venom Page. And you've seen Michael Venom Page, and I'm talking to fans here. You've seen Michael Venom Page in knockouts for Bellator. If you haven't, simply go to YouTube, type in Michael Venom Page, just maybe Venom, and you're going to come up on a highlight reel that is just absolutely absurd. In fact, some of the craziest knockouts belong to Michael Venom Page in the Bellator promotion. Yet, this fight is going to take place on the feet, where both have shined. Holland has faced strikers with the likes of Stephen Thompson and earlier mentioned Jack Della Maddalena. Yet the question that strikes me most about this matchup is the strange timing surrounding Page's entrance into the UFC. He's 36-year-old, and I'm wondering if the outcome of this fight matters to Kevin Holland as much as it should. Because simply put, Kevin Holland seems interested in fighting anybody. I'm not so sure in the ring if he's that interested in winning or not being seriously injured, which, I mean, to be fair, was seriously injured versus Stephen Thompson. But he just is a totally unique personality within the ring, and it does kind of bring up these questions that I am bringing up. I know many of fans have had this thought once or twice in their time, whether they've seen him being held down and wrestled for 15 minutes, just talking back and forth to random people outside of the cage. It is a question. Yet, I don't know if it's a totally fair one. In this matchup, though, It is those two questions. It is the question of Paige coming in the UFC at 36. What's left in the tank for Paige? What does Paige see of his UFC future and his MMA future? And then looking back on Kevin Holland, is he really a fighter that can draw regardless of whether he wins or loses? Because I've heard this take by UFC and by some people close to the UFC, and it's gotten harder for me to swallow each time because Kevin Holland was much more interesting to me when he won. And when he won consistently. When he was beating Jacare Souza and talking from the bottom, I thought it was awesome. But when I saw him being held down and wrestled for 15 minutes without putting any offense together, it wasn't so awesome to me. So I don't know. I disagree on that point. What are your thoughts on that? That a fighter, and more specifically Kevin Holland, can be a draw even when they lose?
Yeah, there's always going to be those diehard fans who will watch or go no matter what. But I feel like there's got to be, in terms of being a draw no matter what, there's got to be like more of a star power. He's Holland is 31. He's I don't know, man. Here's what I think. I think no. Overall, I think that'll answer your question.
Yeah, and I think the time for that is almost over. The Diaz brothers strike me as the guys that could have won or lost 5 or 6 different times, and people would have just turned another eye and said, hey, they're a draw, they're the most interesting thing. And the UFC, I'm sure, has some stats to back up that Kevin Holland is a draw regardless of whether he wins or loses. But how long does that hold over time? I just don't believe it does. And honestly, the biggest question for these two fighters is who needs to win the most. And it really just depends on Michael Venom Page's interest in the UFC and MMA, which we haven't heard yet. He will come out with an interview probably soon. Has not come out already. I would have seen it, and I'm sure that will clarify his intentions with the UFC a little bit further. I do think, regardless, though, it's Kevin Holland with the 25-10 record right now, 13th in the welterweight division. If you don't have that number next to your name, I think you take another serious hit as a draw for the UFC, and I put my quotations around draw for the UFC. So I do think he has to get a win. That brings us into the people's main event. That's Dustin the Diamond Poirier versus Benoit Saint-Denis. Saint-Denis, the god of war, 12th in the lightweight division at just 13-1. A clear star rising in the mixed. Yet Dustin Poirier trading losses and wins since the ending of the McGregor saga. And in his place, the UFC world is kind of shrouded in uncertainty. If these supposed changes by the UFC to go to 165 to 175 pound classes, this might affect Poirier negatively, as he seems to be one of the lighter lightweights on the roster. Buffing up an extra 5 pounds might have a negative effect on his stack up against the rest of these fighters in that division, in that new division that'll possibly be created. I don't feel the same way about Saint Denis, who I feel like would look a little better with 5 extra pounds on his frame come fight night. It's definitely one of those things where Poirier has to wonder, is that a move that kind of pulls him away from the sport a little bit here? And he's already got to be asking himself, is Poirier really one of the top 5 lightweights in the UFC in the present moment? Benoit Saint-Denis, on the other end, is on a meteoric rise following his loss in his debut versus an extremely experienced Zaleski dos Santos. I remember that fight. I've got to say, I gave Saint-Denis no chance. Having a lot of success in LFA, tearing people apart in LFA, but to pull dos Santos in your opening bout in the UFC, that has got to be one of the most pressure cooker situations that there are. And I do believe that was his worst performance in the UFC. Since then, Saint-Denis has rattled off 5 straight victories, and not even just victories. They've been dominating. Whether it's a TKO, whether it's a submission, it hasn't really felt like any of those lightweights have deserved to be in the same ring as Denis. That is why he's getting a call to fight. Really, one of the biggest draws in the sport in Dustin Poirier. I think there's just so much here to break down. A lot of these have looked brutal. A lot of Saint Denis fights have looked brutal, and that's just something that is lacked in Dustin Poirier's fights for sometimes. A lot of the more brutal scenes in Dustin Poirier's fights, especially the kick from Justin Gaethje, has gone against Dustin Poirier, and then Denis has been just tearing people up. That's kind of just the way the UFC does it. If you feel like you're on the path of kind of falling back down the hill, the proverbial mountain there, they're going to put you up against somebody who's hard charging that mountain. And there's no... Saint Denis is terrifying on so many levels. He's former French military, paratrooper, just absolute former SAS operator, looks scary before the fight, talks, says exactly what needs to be said, nothing more, has really got that great personality to just kind of get in a little bit of people's heads here before fight. Now, I don't think that'll happen in this matchup. Dustin Poirier is about as locked down as it gets, but I've got to ask you, Jake, which fighter benefits the most by this fight leaking into the later rounds?
Ooh, so here's the deal. Poirier is a good presser, like a presser boxer. He won't give his opponents a second to breathe. He's just going. So I feel like if Saint Denis can get this fight into the later rounds, and Poirier is able to, like, or not able to, but if he tires himself out because of that pressure that he puts on his opponent, I think he'll benefit more. Denis will benefit more from this fight going into the later rounds.
I have the exact opposite take on that, which is good because I do think this is that close that the two people can have a totally different opinion on this fight. Dustin Poirier does so well at, and I'm gonna relate him to another UFC fighter here, Holloway, because what both of them do at an elite level is take a little something off their punches and then put a little something more back on their punches when they know that punch is going to land flush. That's something that Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier feel like A and B and like the top tier of that skill, and being able to just overwhelm people with the amount of punches and then put the weight behind those punches later on. That's why I do think that Dustin Poirier has the advantages in the later round. I don't feel like Saint Denis is going to feel like he can't get him out of there in the first round. I think Saint Denis is going to be looking to take Poirier out in the first round. If he doesn't get him in the first round, I think Saint Denis will think I can get him in the second. Now, if Saint Denis does not get Poirier out and is wasted any more than the normal 3-round energy, that third round could be Poirier's just to kind of throw weight into it and really put the pressure on. That brings it to the judges' scorecards, I think, in this matchup. And I do think it's who comes on strong late that ends up getting the nod in that victory. That moves us to the very final bout here that we're going to talk about. Sean O'Malley, 17-1, obviously the champion of the bantamweight division, versus Chito Vera, 23-8-1, fifth in the bantamweight division. I've got a question right out the gates for you, Jake. This is a rematch after Sean O'Malley suffered a leg injury in their first bout. Who has the advantage in these rematches?
Ooh, I'm gonna go with, well, let me tell you my winner, and I'm gonna tell you why I think he has the advantage. I'm going with Sean O'Malley. You mentioned the ankle injury, but since their last fight, O'Malley's been moving a lot better. For Vera, he's been described as like he doesn't mind losing until he wins. Let me clarify that. He can get down. So that can be a good thing and a bad thing, right? So he can get so down. It can be a bad thing because he can get so down in the fight that there's no chance of coming back. But it can be a good thing because he can take control of the fight, let, in this case, O'Malley kind of wear himself out, and then he can get back and capitalize. I just don't think that that's going to happen. I think that out of the two, he'll get two down because O'Malley's just such a talented fighter. I think in a three round fight, you got to be even more strategic with when you want to let him wear out and not. I don't think O'Malley's gonna wear himself out. So between the two, I'm going with O'Malley. Plus, he's a cleaner striker in my opinion. He's good with managing his range. So I'm O'Malley all the way in this one.
I'm a O'Malley all the way in this fight as well. I love O'Malley's footwork in this matchup. I will say that Chito Vera should stick to the same game plan of throwing as many calf kicks as possible, because that is, I do think, a weak spot of O'Malley, but I also think that is what possibly gets Chito Vera home if he does come on late and does start to take the third, fourth, and fifth round, as Chito Vera does in his fights, especially these 5-rounders. This is tough. O'Malley wins just by kind of staying around. I don't think Chito Vera is going to hit him with one shot that drops O'Malley. So I think as long as O'Malley's around and continues to survive each given round and stays away from the ground game of Chito Vera, it's a hard match for Chito Vera to win, because simply put, on the feet, I just don't know if there's anybody better than Sean O'Malley right now. And there's certainly nobody as creative. Sean O'Malley is going to be wearing the pink shorts as well, so going to have all the momentum. I'm sure his hair is going to be pink to match it. And I got to be honest, I don't think Chito Vera would exactly be the number one contender in this fight without that leg injury in their first bout. I think if you took that off the books and it never happened, I don't know if Chito Vera is in this fight. O'Malley's certainly in this fight. I just think that Merab Dvalishvili would probably be the true number one contender. This is a good matchup for Sean O'Malley to really get revenge. And I believe in these fighters that are getting revenge. We saw one last week, Royval versus Moreno. Royval able to pull out the victory. I do think that the advantage lies with the fighter that lost in their last matchup. That brings us back to a very short third segment here, as I have ran over in our second segment of UFC 299, Chito Vera versus Sean O'Malley. So I'm going to speed right through this one. I'm excited to talk about our third topic. LeBron broke 40,000 points. Also, Caitlyn Clark breaks the Pete Maravich NCAA scoring record. That all really happened over the last week or two, and that has been just the biggest news out of basketball. LeBron becomes the first NBA player to break past 40,000 points, a recognition that no other player can claim. Despite this achievement, there's a sentiment that this really isn't an exceptional milestone and doesn't push weight in the GOAT debates. Now, that's absurd. LeBron is currently averaging 25, 7, and 8, also averaging the fewest minutes ever in his career. This is his 21st season. There's just never been anybody with this kind of longevity, not even close. This is 3 or 4 or 5 times what anybody's ever been able to do with in their 21st season. And yet it just doesn't feel like there's a lot of love. While what LeBron James has accomplished is mind-boggling. And James will likely hold that points leader for as long, if not longer, than the scoring title was held by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar before, which was just under 40 years. I see LeBron holding that for much longer. The breaking records bug also affected Caitlyn Clark, who broke Pete Maravich's NCAA scoring record and Kelsey Plum's Division I women's basketball scoring record, really kind of back-to-back. Clark would drop 35 points against Ohio State. No collegiate player has reached Pete Maravich's record in 50 years. So a lot of history was broken this week. In honor of this record-breaking week and in honor of these two record-breaking humans, Jake, how long do these records hold, and is there a player in college or in the NBA that could possibly threaten LeBron's scoring record one day?
The only person, the only active player that I could see potentially maybe even coming close to LeBron's record is Wembanyama, who's a rookie right now. So we don't even know a lot about what he's capable of in terms of because in terms of active players, there are only 7 active players with more than 20,000 points, which is half of what LeBron has. In terms of Caitlyn Clark's scoring record, I don't know. I don't know if there's anybody that would be able to come close.
I'm going to take the last few minutes here just to ask one more question in honor of these two. You know, I already talked about it. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar held the scoring record for 39 years. Pete Maravich's record was held for 50 years. If one of these two records are to break, which one would break sooner? The NBA all-time scoring record or Pete Maravich's NCAA scoring record?
Off the top of my head, I'm going LeBron's record. I'm going LeBron's record just because I think, like I said, we don't know much about Wembanyama, but I think he has a chance. If I remember saying this correctly, I believe he's only averaging 0.2 points less than LeBron did in his rookie year. So I think he's got a chance.
That's interesting because I was trying to set you up to take that. I actually think it's Pete Maravich's record that will be broken again. Well, I'm sorry. Now, it is Pete Maravich's record still. They will hold it as that in the record books, but we can just say Caitlyn Clark's record for now. I think that is broken sooner. I know it's been 50 years. I purposely said that to convince you not to take the NBA scoring record, but I've heard the numbers. Wembanyama would have to stay healthy for the entirety, play 82 games, and score right around like 28 points a game. It's hard to do. It's hard to ask. It's a longevity thing. It's not just 4 years in college. Can you be the best college player ever or score the most points ever? Mm-hmm. I do think it's a little bit different, but both are just so incredibly hard. I don't think there's a chance neither of these scoring records are broken again in our lifetime. How insane is that? And with that, that'll close. And that'll do it for our 8th episode of the Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM. I invite listeners to be one of our very first followers on our Instagram. That's the Blake and Jake Show, no spaces. If you caught part of the show, but not the whole show, or maybe you want to hear the whole show over again, check us out on Spotify and YouTube at the Blake and Jake Show. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we hope to see you next week for another episode of the Blake and Jake Show, Wednesdays at 2 p.m. on KCOU 88.1 FM. Thank you so much for listening.